coming! The fascists are coming! Mom! Come look! It's the fascists!
Mason! We don't call them that to their face. Get inside!
Why? Being a fascist bad?
Now that the dust has finally settled, and looking back, if you were to ask most fans where the Gears of War series crossed the line from respected and beloved game franchise into a pathetic laughingstock, most would probably direct your attention to Gears 5, and it wasn't hard to see why. Gears 5 was everything Gears of War wasn't, an absolute clusterfuck of bad ideas, a pointless, unsatisfying, overdone narrative, incompetent, unlikable characters, and doing irrevocable damage to the Gears of War brand. While winning fake praise from Access, corporate, shill, media outlets, and critics, but consistently savaged by fans and largely ignored by mainstream audiences. It also didn't hold a candle to previous installments, selling the least amount in the series' history. So how did it all happen? How was this game a critical and commercial failure? Well, there's a lot to talk about here, so let's get into it. The Coalition wanted to make their mark on Gears of War and make a full departure from what the franchise has done traditionally, making the necessity to change and keep things fresh, take risks, and make Gears 5 appealing to modern audiences. The result was one of the most radically different games in the whole series. Gears 5 was fully content with following, copying formulas and mechanics from popular different game franchises, creating a weird, disconnected experience, royally fucking up, and completely obliterating Gears of War's identity. Instead of cherishing Gears of War's core experiences and put in the work to innovate and implement new additions for fans and players want to invest in that they can't get anywhere else. In other words, the developer's philosophy for the game was for it to be the same as everything else, thus following trends. When Gears of War itself, that just doesn't work most of the time. And classic Gears of War was already a standout, unique, loved, and successful. And the Gears of War franchise in the beginning used to lead and pave the way as an innovator. Players were constantly conditioned to glitches, bugs, and broken gameplay in Gears 5, making the game utterly forgettable, and the majority of the problems, especially obvious ones, were never fixed since the game's launch to even this very day. In addition, Gears 5 had poor servers and online matchmaking, with players having to sit through long minutes to hours to connect to a match, along with frequent disconnections and crashes, forcing players to be penalized or restart playthroughs for something that wasn't their fault. Over time, the gameplay and some of the mechanics were revamped a few times, and the majority of Gears 5's most obvious problems were fixed about a year later. There were some positives if you looked hard enough. Making the hovering robot in the series a playable character, and the open world levels was a bit of fun only for a while. The Coalition pushed and marketed the open world implement as the biggest selling point for the game, but ended up being one of Gears 5's biggest failings, as the developers didn't fully commit to it, didn't take advantage at all of the extra space, and never tied any of it into the game's actual fighting to make something that was truly distinct. The result was a blank linear sandbox with no compulsion to go wandering for more in two underused large maps, with just more downtime before moving on to the next mission, as players were required to travel from one side of the map to the next, and wasn't helped either from its tedious and repetitive action. Gears 5 had a predatory microtransaction system, a system so absurd, the Coalition's community employees were not only completely silent about it, but the developer community managers defended and justified the game's microtransaction simulator as not only the best in the series, but one of the best in the gaming industry. Yet prices were egregious, items being sold were useless, keeping unwanted content around for weeks, along with a minimal in-game currency which was called iron that can only be obtained every 6 months. The game's economy was a greedy, intolerable system, with everything locked behind a paywall and no other way for players to earn any of the content in-game. And all items that were paid for were not given to players for free. Inevitably, this backfired, and Gears 5 and the Coalition were mocked, since Gears 5 was a $60 title and the players had to spend even more money to acquire the game's goods. Not including the majority of all Gears 5's content and digital goods overall were ported over from the previous game Gears of War 4. Some changes the way the system operated were made months later, but for the second time this was another new low for the Coalition, with a poor manipulative design that was anti-consumer and not very player-friendly. Veteran Gears players were fooled once, so they weren't going to be tricked in the same way again. Gears 5 was a series of dumb, superficial action set pieces, cliched and overrated spectacle, strung together by a dumb as fuck script, bouncing from place to place, virtually on convenience, coincidence, and contrivance just to get from point A to point B. With a tone that was all over the place, swinging from ridiculous gags to epic conflict to heavy drama in a matter of minutes with absolutely no sense of structure or consistency. The elements of the story were cheap, forced, and very manipulative. What happened with the Settlement 2 event and JD Phoenix was obviously intended to be shocking, and while that was true, it was also weighted in one direction, with the writers making an arbitrary judgment about JD's action, instead of asking the question and allowing players to find their own answers. In the end, the narrative ignored the context, made him into a bad guy, and along the way he was broken down, humiliated, and does what he's told to do in the face of an utterly ignorant, self-absorbed, vomit-inducing Mary Sue. And the irony was, of course, JD did nothing wrong and was completely understandable given his situation. His friends didn't care and left him high and dry because they were petty, pathetic children, written like petty, pathetic children.
If you can't take a little bloody nose, maybe you ought to go back home and crawl under your bed.
While Marcus Phoenix and many classic characters in the game were all pushed to the side, artificially dumbed down, making them say and do things that their Gears of War counterparts never would, to make room for this new lead character, instead of putting in the work to iron them out. That is to say, the writers of this game had the inability to elevate their own mediocre work, either through lack of talent, intelligence, or creativity, so instead they resorted to betraying everyone else to make the new characters look better. For instance, Clayton was set up as a capable veteran soldier in the originals that fans knew for a decade, only to disrespect his character, spending the limited time marginalizing him in favor of a new character who was barely in the game, and go into a holding pattern until he fit the needs of the script. Then there was the concepts and events stolen from other Gears of War games and stripped of their meaning and emotion. Whether it's discovering the secrets of New Hope, stopping the Queen of the Monsters, or using the Hammer of Dawn to end the war, it feels exactly like what it is: old concepts reshaped and awkwardly jammed into a game that was basically a conglomeration of half-baked, meandering, implemented ideas. Furthermore, Gears 5 was divisive, disingenuous, divided fans and fellow players alike across the board, due to not only directors who had modest talent with passing knowledge of the IP, but a motley crew of people who either don't understand, or openly have no passion or respect for the property they've inherited, or simply don't care about anything except using a popular video game franchise as a platform for their politics. Especially politics rooted in the present-day social justice movements. This combination rebooting the Gears of War franchise with a progressive polish and shoving intersectional feminism into the writing was bad enough, but the game could have still been saved with a fun, engaging experience, and that was out of control. Eventually, the game's player base dropped like a comet and Gears of War's popularity was killed. And of course, blame any negative fan reactions as toxic and refusal to accept any kind of criticism, fanning the flames of resentment and division across the Gears of War fanbase, clubs, and communities alike, tearing itself apart. Including the same trite, worn-out, copy-and-paste argument that's been used in most modern-day entertainment franchises. If you don't like the garbage we've served up, then clearly you're the problem, not us. Summarizing everything about Gears 5, I find myself returning to the same question. Is this a story that really needed to be told? It feels like a game that was made because it needed to be done rather than because there was this great story waiting to be unveiled. And the fact of the matter that the Gears of War story was effectively closed off by the end of Gears of War 3. A trilogy that established peace, the war is over, Sarah was saved, and also heroes as a result. Did we really need to know what happened to Marcus Phoenix, Anya Stroud, and the heroes of Gears of War after that perfect ending, recognizing that their fighting is over and humanity is safe? Having completed the second chapter of Gears with Gears 5, I think I would have been happier if it ended there, instead of recycling the same story, rewriting the histories of the originals, and shamelessly rehashing and ripping off iconic moments and events in the series, and all Gears 5 did was invite really unfavorable comparisons. No identity of its own, failing to bring anything new to the table, and just throwing stuff at a wall to see what sticks, instead of actually listening to the fanbase. along with the developers modernizing and making Gears of War a more relatable, diverse, and accessible franchise when it already was. In conclusion, fans were all hoping for a game that would correct the mistakes of its predecessor, execute a good second chapter, and capitalize on the opportunity they had to break the mold of the franchise. Instead, what we actually got was an often broken gaming experience, telling a ridiculous, disrespectful, confused melodrama that desperately reached for big payoffs it didn't earn, and forgettable. What a fucking waste.